Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. In this episode, I was interviewing Jim, a 3D-Zelda speedrunner, and he told me a lot about how he got started with 3D Zelda games and how he would start running these games if he would start today. So for everybody interested in 3D Zelda games and 3D Zelda speedruns, give this one a try. It's like really, really good content there. He was talking like phenomenal. And if you're interested in glitch hunting and how glitch get discovered in Zelda speedruns, there's like a really, really awesome story towards the end of this episode. I had so much fun listening to him, how he discovered the big glitch in Skyward Sword. It was like really, really inspiring. So yeah, listen all the way through the end. It's really, really worth it. I hope you liked the episode. Thank you for listening to this and see you at the end. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this podcast episode 3. Today I have Gymnast. Yeah, Nost. Nest. Okay, sorry. I'm really bad at pronouncing names. Here with me, he is a 3D Zelda speedrunner. Speedruns like basically every 3D Zelda game he has speedrun. Mainly known, in my opinion, for Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time 3D, so the 3DS version of that game. Hey, Jim, introduce yourself.
Hello there, I am Gymnast86, and like my introduction, I speedrun pretty much anything within, the 3D Zelda game space. Haven't really done anything outside of that, notably. So, anything 3D Zelda is what I feel like I know about and what we're pretty much here to talk about today.
Yeah. So, you already mentioned it. We're going to talk about 3D Zelda because, 3D Zelda games, in my opinion, are they're something special. Like, they are all very, very glitch abusive, and they really, if somebody has never seen a 3D Zelda speedrun and they watch one, they get completely thrown off because they play through the game completely different nowadays. So how did you find interest in that, and how do you come back to all these different Zelda games nowadays? How did you start with it?
Well, yeah, I got started all the way back in 2013 when I was only about 14 years old. So I ended up getting introduced to speedrunning after one of my online friends watched Narcissa Wright speedrun The Wind Waker back then. Mm-hmm. And my friend was like, "Oh, we should try this out. This looks really cool." And I was like, "I don't know. This looks like it's really hard and it'll take up all of our time. And I don't know about this, but sure, I'll try it anyway." And so, what essentially we did is we figured out that Speedruns Live was a website that we could join races on back then. And so we figured out that people would occasionally race Wind Waker, and we just joined the next one that we were both free for. And that's essentially how we started, or at least how I started.
Mm-hmm. So did you just you said you just jumped into races, and how did you prepare for those races? Because when I hear people talking about Zelda speedruns, especially 3D Zeldas, but things like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask in particular, that you need several months of preparation of just being able to execute all these tricks. How did that went for you? Because I can see a lot of people being very scared to not get started with these games. They like Zelda and they find the speedrun looking cool, but they cannot see themselves speedrunning those games.
Yeah, I mean, back in 2013, the games definitely were not as optimized as they are today.
Yeah, obviously.
I mean, I mentioned how we just found a race and then joined up with it. I mean, I probably should have mentioned that, before doing that, we also tried to go through and learn the tricks of the Wind Waker run. Mm-hmm. So we would watch what Narcissa did and we would just try to copy that to the best of our ability. We didn't entirely know how everything in the game worked, but we just tried to get what we could out of the video and try it for ourselves. And looking back on it, I'm actually very surprised how much we were able to figure out, without, any outside help from people in the community, just watching, one of Narcissa's runs. And so, yeah, I mean, we didn't learn the entire game. We only learned up to the Master Sword, which is generally semi-popular category within some Zelda games. You start the game and then you see how long it takes you to get the Master Sword. So in the case of the Wind Waker back then, that was only about like a third of the run or so, right? Like usually you could get to the Master Sword in about 2 hours on the English version of the game, which is what we had. So once we had both been able to complete runs up to the Master Sword, like between ourselves, then we ended up joining the races on Speedruns Live.
Okay. So how fast were your times actually back then? Just out of curiosity, like when the world record was, like you said, around 2 hours. How fast were you starting out?
Well, at that point, I believe the any percent record was about 4 hours and 40 minutes. I don't remember how long it would typically take to get to the Master Sword for a top runner back then. The very first time that I got to the Master Sword, I went from the start of the game to the Master Sword in 3 hours and 40 minutes. So
okay.
It was not, very good, but
it was still enjoyable and, the start of a journey.
Yeah, it was still enjoyable. I remember even though I was only 14 back then, I remember thinking that, like I started this, no matter how many mistakes I should make, I should still complete it, right? The run was terrible. It was 3 hours and 40 minutes to get to the Master Sword. Whereas, typically top runners could easily get to the Master Sword in less than 2 hours. But, I feel like I just somehow knew that, it would be better to just keep on trying to complete it instead of, trying to restart to do better.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a pit many people fall into. Like, it depends on the person, I believe, how you learn and practice things. Like, some people are just like, okay, once I know the basics, I just jump into the game and see what I can do. But I also see, many speedrunners approach a game like, oh, I practice, very, very high-level stuff before I get started. I think, yeah, it totally comes down to the person. But, yeah, for you, it seems to work out to just learn the basics and then jump into it and see how it goes. Also my preferred way for this. Yeah, so, and how did it went on from there? Did you just kept on improving and seeing what other people did better than you? And how did you, narrowed it all down that you became, better at Wind Waker? Or did you started speedrunning other games right away? Like, how did you approach that entire, getting better progress in these Zelda games?
Back then, I didn't really have a method for that. Like, after I did, the initial learning process for Wind Waker Master Sword, I didn't really do any more practicing after that. Like, I would just join races on Speedruns Live, and slowly my times would go down from that. Just because, back then, there were actually there were a lot of Wind Waker Master Sword races that were happening at the time. So, I was doing runs of this every other day.
Okay.
Because that's just how often the races would happen. And so just from doing it, repetition builds muscle memory. So eventually, I just got good from doing so many runs of being able to get up to the Master Sword. And, as I would go along, I would be in, Skype calls with the other races because Discord didn't exist back then. And so, sometimes one of the other runners would be like, hey, you're not, you should be doing this strategy because it's faster. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that strategy was a thing. Okay, I'll try that next time. And so, it was even though I didn't realize it at the time, I was slowly adding things to the run to make myself faster, which just obviously would keep on lowering my times and whatnot.
So basically, no, sorry for interrupting you. I thought you were done there.
Yeah, sorry. And then, after that, a month or two later, I began actually doing any percent.
In Wind Waker?
Yeah, in Wind Waker. So usually it would be races with people still. But then eventually I was like, okay, if clearly nobody has been racing this for a while, I'll just do any percent runs on my own. Because at the time, the concept of doing a run not in a race felt kind of weird to me, right? It's obviously commonplace now, but at the time I was like, but it's not fun if it's not a race. But, eventually I was like, okay, I can just do attempts on my own. I don't need a race to like actually do an attempt or something like that.
Okay, so basically you all just started with races because that was like your fun way of experiencing speedruns, which I mean, yeah, I most of my speed games I actually also started because of speedrun tournaments. Like there was a speedrun tournament or a big race, a community race going on. I started learning the game and then that's how I got into it, because racing and getting in touch with the community was like the most fun for me in the beginning in speedrunning. And you just, your entire improvement progress happened because you just kept playing the game and you didn't, practice that much per se. You just practicing because you did full runs and races. Awesome to hear, because like many people, I feel like have the misunderstanding that in order to get better, in order to get effectively better, you need to just practice a whole lot, but you can also like just enjoy speedrunning as a race and you get good from that. Really awesome to hear that. I want to ask something, but I totally forgot it. What my next point was at this point.
I think you mentioned before about like transitioning to other games.
Yeah, that would be also cool to hear, like how you because like what I feel like is you can. I personally think you can only really focus on one game at a time. Like the moment you split your attention, you can never improve at multiple games at the same time. Like maybe in very rare cases. So how did you end up like stop running Wind Waker, and why? And how did you expand it, like your games, like your speed games? Because obviously not every speed game fits to every person.
Yeah, so like for a while I was just doing Wind Waker, but eventually my friend who like initially like got me into speedrunning and racing and all that suggested that we also try to learn Ocarina of Time any% because it was shorter. Because back then, that was like right after the wrong warp to Ganon's Tower from Deku Tree was discovered, the Ganondorf wrong warp. So like records were still being set fairly frequently back then with that new route. And also, as I mentioned, it was very short. We could probably learn this faster than we were able to like learn up to Master Sword in the Wind Waker. But we were kind of wrong about that because like we couldn't just like throw ourselves at Ocarina of Time and try to figure out, what people were doing based on what we could see in the video, right? Like we needed an actual explanation to how, like, the Ganondorf wrong warp works if we wanted to do it successfully and all that kind of stuff. Which thankfully there were tutorials for it back then that we were able to like listen to and eventually learn the setups for. And that's like Ocarina of Time was the first one that I learned outside of Wind Waker, if I remember correctly. But like I know how you said that like you could only really focus on one speed game at a time. In the beginning, when I first started speedrunning, I didn't really do that. Like, if I wasn't feeling Wind Waker for the day, I would try to run Ocarina of Time or something like that. Like I didn't put my focus solely into one game. But of course, the consequence of that is that in the beginning, I never really got like, extremely good at any one game, right? Like I was like pretty far down on the leaderboards for every game that I tried. The first game that I actually sort of stuck with and put a lot of time into, though, was Wind Waker HD, because that was released in September of 2013. So, I'd been speedrunning for 6 months, roughly, by the time September 2013 came around. And Wind Waker HD is released. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's Wind Waker HD. It's pretty similar to the original Wind Waker. I'm going to try running this game. So, it comes out. I do like a sort of initial playthrough where like I test the various things from the original game to see if they work or if they don't work and all that stuff. Unfortunately, at the time, the most important glitch that we knew of in the original Wind Waker, storage, did not work in Wind Waker HD like we had hoped. like once I'd finished that initial playthrough, I just went straight into trying to speedrun the game, right? Like, no practice, no nothing. Let's just go through and speedrun this game.
Mm.
And, that's when I got my first world record in the Wind Waker HD any percent, but it was only really a record because pretty much nobody else had done runs of the game at this point. So, like, it wasn't really something that could be, like, no one was good at the game yet. So world records didn't really mean anything, or the world record at that point in time didn't really mean anything. But, I was excited because it was my first world record. And, I really wanted to keep that record, so I kept on playing Wind Waker HD, kept on both getting the time down and simultaneously getting better at the same time, which is what helps me to actually grind out the any percent category into, like, something that was better, or, like, into a run that was better than what I first had.
Yeah, I mean, you were the first person who did a run, basically, or, like, one of the first persons. So you totally earned a world record, and I can really see that you get excited from that. So you talked about excitement, because, like, one thing I see many people struggle with is, like, how they stay motivated for a long time in their games. And like, sometimes, like, in the beginning, everybody is super focused on the game, having a lot of fun and just naturally improving, because it's also, like, a lot easier to improve in the beginning. But at some point, like, I believe everybody does that. They stop, like, practicing that seriously or trying to get better that seriously, because they sort of run out of steam or motivation. And for you, it seems like that you just, you love the Zelda series, and you jump from your favorite Zelda games, and that seems like what keeps you motivated. But what else is there that allows you to run these games for such a long time? I mean, you mentioned we just talked about you speedrunning in 2013, and now it's 2020, so that's, like, basically 7 years. So that's still, like, a really long time. So yeah, can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, my motivation was, like, purely based on, just wanting to get better times. Like, it felt good, it felt productive to just be able to lower my time down in a speed game, like, regardless of what the game was, right? Mm-hmm. So, essentially what I did is, I would play a game for a while, and when I got a time that I felt satisfied with, or a time that, like, I feel like it's not very much worth it to continue running this game now that I got this time, I would just switch to another game in the Zelda series and try to run that one. So, like, after I'd played Wind Waker HD for a while and got my time down to something that no one wanted to contest for various other reasons, I then picked up, like, Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess kind of simultaneously. Because one thing that I was also interested in doing was the 3D-Zelda challenge, right? The 3D-Zelda challenge was supposed to be this, like, big challenge where you go through, you speedrun all of the 3D-Zelda games, their any percent categories, and back then the goal was to do it all in under 18 hours, because that's roughly what the, like, having a good time in each game would equate to, sort of.
Okay.
So I was very motivated. At that point, I had learned Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time. So I was very motivated to then go and learn Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. And, as you said, improvement when you first start out speedrunning is, very apparent, and it comes pretty easily as long as you just keep playing the game. So what I would do is, I would try to learn to speedrun Majora's Mask. I would, get to the point where I could finally do runs. I would do some runs, or, like, 1 or 2 runs to see what I could get as a time. And then I would switch over to Twilight Princess. I would learn the game. I would, try to do a run or 2 to see what time I could get. And then, I went into trying to learn Skyward Sword. Same process as Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess. And I would just kind of, like, weirdly switch between the 3 of those, if that makes any sense. And, like, sometimes I would go back to Wind Waker HD if I felt like playing that. Like, I didn't have, like, a direction for, like, a single game that I wanted to play necessarily. It was just like, I don't feel like playing these games today. I'm going to go play this one. I really feel like playing this game today, so I'm going to play it. I think that's what helped me with like countering burnout, because if I burned out on one game, I just go to another one, and I wouldn't be burned out on that other game. That I was never very good at any of those at the time, except for Wind Waker HD. So improvement for each of the games sort of came anyway, just because of the fact that I wasn't very good, and simply playing the game at all was helping me to improve at any of them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds very cool. Like you have a very, I wouldn't have thought that you have like that kind of approach to speedrunning, to be honest. Like you just jump from game to game and play whatever you enjoy on that day. It's like really cool.
I mean, that's not how I like think of it today, but back then that's essentially what I did.
Yeah. I mean that's how it started, Yeah, because like I don't know, it's just, I mean, you had a lot of fun, I can believe. And you probably still have fun today, but yeah, back then, having fun in the beginning is like super, super helpful and awesome for finding like hobbies like these. And if that's your way, like everybody experienced speedrunning in different ways, different fashions. So yeah, cool to hear that. Like people like me, I grind out Celeste a lot, like, but not super serious like other people do. And you just seem to, but I still have fun. Like I just complete full runs for a very long time, not really caring about improvement, but just playing through the game over and over and over was what enjoyed me the most. And for you, it seems like to just, okay, so what is the game I want to play today? Okay, now I have Zelda Ocarina of Time I want to play today, and on the other day I want to play Twilight Princess. And yeah, that's really cool to hear. Really, really cool. Like I believe many people don't think that's how speedrunning works, but you make it work.
I mean, well, back then, like we've mentioned multiple times, like back then the games weren't as optimized and like weren't as difficult as they are today. So that approach kind of had a better chance of working back then.
Okay.
I would say when things weren't as optimized, you could kind of like if you had the basic knowledge of the speed run and like how the tricks worked and whatnot, you could kind of just pick it up and try it out and probably be able to pull it off decently well.
So today this wouldn't work anymore, would you say? Like, I know a lot of Zelda games have been like massively improved over the years, especially last year. But yeah, like how would you say should it work? Or like if someone wants to pick up Zelda or the 3D Zelda games today, how should they approach it? Like, what would you recommend? How would you approach it today if you have to?
I mean, approaching each game is like it's completely different how you would want to like approach, trying to get into each game. I mean, the only like similar advice that I would had for any of the 3D Zelda games is to, join the speedrunning Discord for that game, right? Every single Zelda game has a specific Discord server that's dedicated to it, like discussing strategies, channels where you can ask for help if you're having trouble or you're stuck on trying to figure something out and stuff like that. But just due to like how different each game is, like the way you practice, or at least the way I practice each game, tends to sort of vary, just depending on what I feel like I need to work on or what I think like needs the most practice, if that makes sense. So yeah, getting into it is, like I said, it's different for each game. Like, for Wind Waker HD, if you want to get into that, you're probably not going to have a very easy time if you want to try to just jump right into the manual super swimming aspect of it, per se, right? Like, manual super swimming is an extremely difficult trick to learn how to do. Like, you can't just, open up the game, watch a video, and be able to do it. Like, that's just not going to work. But, for something like maybe, I don't know, probably the closest example today would be Skyward Sword. Like, you might be able to, just watch a video of Skyward Sword and maybe just be able to intuitively pick up what's happening based on what you see on screen. But I'm not sure that really holds for any of the other 3D Zeldas these days.
Yeah. Okay, so we can jump like from what you just said right to like the next point I actually want to love to talk about, because as I mentioned, like I don't know if I mentioned it, but I will mention it now. Like 3D Zelda games are extremely difficult, or look extremely difficult, and you just said it too. So, as I said, many people take like months to just practice the tricks to pull off like the speed run. Like if you want to learn, for example, I don't know, Ocarina of Time 100. It's going to change, I believe, but if from the current route right now, you need like several months to just execute every trick, and then you can maybe start learning the route and learning the run in itself, which, like, you know, is like very brutal. It sounds very brutal. Like how does someone new pick up these games? So that's like something I really want like to hear from you, because out there, if there's someone who wants to speedrun a Zelda game, a 3D Zelda game, how do they overcome this entry level of glitch learning and, you know, glitch understanding? Because I believe that's like the biggest point why people don't start speedrunning these games or have a harder time starting these games.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, any percent run of a 3D Zelda game these days is like extremely complex, right? Like I said, the only one you might be able to sort of figure out is Skyward Sword.
But even that is like very complex when you watched it. Like I watched your run at GDQ, and it still was like so many funny things happened there.
I mean, as general advice, like I know that specifically for the Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess communities, there are specific routes that are made that are meant to be beginner friendly, right? Like I think there's like 6 different any percent routes that are that are like made for Wind Waker HD at the moment. Like, you know, there's obviously the fastest one, but then there's 5 other variations depending on like what tricks you may or may not want to try to perform in the run. And I do think that like beginner routes are a great way to try to start running a game. Like, you know, by doing the beginner route, you can see whether or not you'll actually like speedrunning the game, but you're not going to be constrained to a lot of the difficult tricks that normally come with trying to speedrun that game at an extremely high level, right? And then the more you get into it, you know, you can start to say like, okay, I think I'm ready to try to add, you know, this trick into the run that I've been practicing lately, so I'll switch over to, you know, this more difficult route of the game, which is faster and stuff like that. So it's kind of all about pacing yourself and making sure that you're comfortable with trying to learn like the glitches that are in the run, or that you're comfortable with, you know, executing the glitches in a run, so that you can actually have fun doing the run instead of, you know, trying to be extremely stressed out over whether or not you'll be able to finish the run at all. So again, I know that this is done for both Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD. Some other games, like, you know, the Wind Waker and Skyward Sword, the idea of a beginner friendly route doesn't really lend itself well to like what the current speedrun is. Like, due to how complex memory fragmentation is in Wind Waker, we only have, you know, the 1 any percent route, which is the fastest any percent route, because the memory setup that we have to do for a beginner route would have to be something that gets fleshed out and figured out by someone. And I'm not sure that anyone in the community really has the motivation to do that, since like we're still trying to search for better setups for the fastest any percent route, like at the current moment and stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, if there's like a beginner route or an easier route, even if it takes longer than the fastest route that might be present in like the world record run of a game, I would always recommend trying to do the beginner route first. And then if you like it and you want to try to get more challenged, then move on to whatever might be next.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you already mentioned everything I want to hear from you. That's cool, because like you just said learning the beginning route to get a feeling of the game, to see if you like it or not, and then if you want to improve, then you can start slowly adding those tricks, and I mean you will get more used to the game itself. So you will generally get faster and faster, I believe. So yeah, that's That's really cool. Okay, we haven't talked about that yet because I feel like we are about to get to an end that's like very, good and makes a good episode, because like you mentioned everything. It was really awesome to talk with you till this point. But one thing I want to ask you is, like, you said you are like a 3D Zelda speedrunner. That's what you enjoy. But how did you end up speedrunning this game? Like, I had like tried several speedruns or different speed games before I ended up with Celeste, which is like the one and only game I truly speedrun to this point, I would say, and I, really put time into. And for you, it was like Zelda. And how would you like tell other people how they should approach speedrunning in general? Like, how do they find the right speed game for them? Because like, if someone wants to pick up speedrunning, they may try out, games from their childhood and everything. But how would you recommend people finding the right speed game? Like, have you any tips on that?
I mean, I feel like the answer to that is a lot simpler than most people make it out to be. Like, it's just find a game that you have fun with. Mm-hmm. Basically, is all it is. That's what the simple answer is. There's also like a lot of other things that could go into what makes something fun for you, and like you kind of have to figure that out for yourself, like another reason that like I managed to speedrun a lot of 3D Zelda games is because, once I had fun with Wind Waker, it was easier for me to have fun in the rest of the 3D Zelda series, because the controls between like Zelda games, the way that like Link moves and like the mechanics of the game are generally very similar, and it's familiar to me, right? Like, going from Wind Waker to Twilight Princess, the B button still slashes my sword, the A button still rolls and does jump attacks, we still have backflips, side hops, general movement. It's all like at a higher level, kind of the same, even though obviously like the lower mechanics work differently, but it was more intuitive for me to get into and have fun with, because I didn't have to, relearn how to control the game or anything like that.
Okay, cool. I thought there was something else to come, but you seem to be fine. I believe we do have everything. You said how you got started, how you learned it, how you would learn it if you have to learn it nowadays, how to improve from there. One thing, it's not like in particular like to help people, but I think like you can tell a good story about that is like as I said already, Zelda, especially Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword, and also like Majora's Mask, I believe, has like evolved a whole lot in the last year, like end of the last year and beginning of this year. A lot of crazy stuff got discovered. And how are you people doing this? Like, I know you had a big role in the Skyward Sword improvement, I believe. So right. Yeah, how are you guys doing this, and how do you find that, and why are you even like, I don't know how you do this. Like, I have no idea about glitchhunting at all. But I get so surprised that speedrunners figure out stuff and, still searching, and a game that's like over 20 years old is still getting, big major improvements. And yeah, I just wanna hear from a Zelda speedrunner how you guys do that.
I was actually thinking about this like just yesterday about like glitch hunting in general, but typically like the way that you start glitch hunting in any certain scenario is you try to like ask a question to yourself, right?
Okay.
Like the question might be, can I clip through this corner on this map, right? Like this corner looks very weirdly shaped. Is it possible to maybe clip through it somehow?
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, can I skip, using an item here to save a few seconds or something like that? And then, you try to come up with like various interactions that you can do with the game that you think might help you achieve that question, that you're asking. Sounds weird to achieve a question, but like, you can think of the question as a problem, and you're trying to solve the problem, essentially, because you believe that solving the problem will make the speedrun faster somehow, right?
Yeah.
So, this question is completely different depending on who the person is that's trying to glitch hunt or what they even end up figuring out from their glitch hunting efforts. I can tell you that specifically with the case of Skyward Sword, right? I had begun making a series of videos called Elusive Glitches last year about like things in Skyward Sword that like we really should be able to skip somehow, but we just can't. Because, there are various properties of the game within these specific situations that make us unable to skip all of this stuff, right? Because back then, Skyward Sword, like, you hardly skipped anything in a Skyward Sword any % speedrun.
Yeah, I watched all the runs too.
Yeah, like, the run was nearly 5 hours long just for any %. And that was, with cutscene skips and relatively fast dialogue and all that other kind of quality of life stuff that modern games typically have. So with my like Elusive Glitches series, I began making those videos because I thought that, like, if we get this problem, or if we expose this problem to more people, then more people might have ideas on how to solve these problems that we have. And so, I made, I think, 3 videos up until about April of 2019. And I began working on a 4th video. This 4th video wasn't really like an Elusive Glitches video. It was more of like a documentation video on how the back in time glitch in Skyward Sword works, because like, I know that back in time is confusing to a lot of people, and I wanted to hopefully present it in like a clearer fashion than what we typically try to describe it in during runs. So I began making that video, and in the process of like making that video, I realized that there were certain things that even I didn't fully understand about back in time. Like, there were a lot of small assumptions that I had about how back in time worked, which I like wasn't entirely sure if they were correct or not. So, what I did is I opened up Skyward Sword. I like went through and I used a new tool at the time called the Dolphin Memory Engine to, view the game's memory in real time to try and understand how the game was like doing everything that it was, or at least everything that I was interested in. And with the Dolphin Memory Engine, like, it shows essentially like just a hex dump of whatever the game's RAM is at the time.
Yeah.
So you can, jump through it and search for specific addresses to try and, see what values are set where, and try to, figure out what everything maps to at all of the addresses that are present. And in the process of doing that, I noticed something weird that was happening in back in time. And I noticed that in back in time, I could set specific flags on like the Skyloft map during back in time, but those flags wouldn't get carried over to the file that I started, right? Like if I open up file 1 in back in time and I set a flag on Skyloft, I noticed that the value of the flag would change. But when I started my file, the value of the flag would reverse back to what it was on the file. And I was like, that's kind of strange. And then my question became, is there a way I can keep that value on my file instead of having it get reverted back to what it was?
Mm-hmm.
And once I had asked myself that question, the answer ended up presenting itself to me in like less than 10 minutes, because I realized that the value was always getting reverted right after I selected the file while the game was fading out. So then, like, my derivative question was, okay, can I keep this value set on my file if I set it while the game is fading out to load the file? So I tried that, and of course then the answer was yes. I was able to take this value from the title screen version, the back in time version of Skyloft, and move it over onto the file that I selected. And when that happened, when the value stayed on the file and I loaded into my file regularly, I was like, oh, like I understood the potential that this technique had, because I understood like vaguely what kind of stuff the game would store with these different values that we could set on Skyloft. So in my head, I very quickly realized the gravity of the technique that I had just now figured out. And then from there, I went to, like, I started just documenting as much stuff as I could. It's like, it was like 2 a.m. when this happened. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not getting any sleep tonight. So I spent the next 8 hours just documenting as much stuff as I could before I eventually went out to get a quick breakfast, come back, and then start streaming for like 12 hours that day of just me documenting everything that I could find within the game. And of course, others began helping too once I, exposed this technique that I'd discovered to everyone. So that's essentially how it happened for Skyward Sword. Everything after that was just like documentation on what we can or can't do on like the various maps in Skyward
and
Sword.
Understanding it and seeing results. Wow, that was a really cool story. I'm happy that I still asked that question. That sounds so cool. Man, I always say to myself, like, when big things get discovered in speedrunning, it's like, speedrunners are so awesome. Like, what's currently happening with Ocarina of Time is so mind-blowing. It's so fucking crazy. Like, it was crazy even before that. Like, at GDQ, ZFG's run was already, like, really, really cool. And now it's getting, like, far beyond that. It's so crazy, and it's like
now we're spawning our wings.
Yeah, it's so incredible that like what people can do with games. It's I don't know. It's like the beauty of speedrunning. I have no other words for that. I don't know what it is.
But like usually every single big glitch that gets discovered has some kind of story like that behind it, and it's different for every single one. But ultimately, at least from what I was thinking yesterday, it comes down to just like asking a question or proposing like a problem to the game and seeing if glitch hunting can somehow solve that problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes, most of the time, like, you'll have this problem and you won't really be able to do anything about it. But the cool thing is that whenever you propose a problem, very rarely is the answer to the problem no, because you don't know whether or not the answer is no or yes, and you're always trying to push it towards the answer being yes. So it always gives like this kind of hope that maybe we'll be able to do this someday if we just are able to figure it out, right? Like proposing a problem and the answer being no is usually not a thing that happens unless you like literally go through the code of the game and like logically prove that the question can't work out the way you proposed it or something like that. But that's way too complicated and way too much effort for most people to try and do. So that also kind of gives some motivation for like continual glitch hunting of games.
Yeah.
And also, seeing all the progress that we've made, like, it just motivates us further to try and find more stuff because, Ocarina of Time, of course, now uses arbitrary code execution and can be beaten in 12 to 13 minutes.
12, I think. I believe it's already sub 12.
Yeah. Okay.
And with no source requirement, 100 is like nearly sub 1 hour, which is like, it's super crazy what people do.
But, Skyward Sword any percent, even though, the Skyward Sword 80% went from, just under 5 hours to now being just over 2 hours.
Yeah.
But even so, like, there are still theories that we have on how we might be able to keep on bypassing certain limits that the game gives us. And, anytime I have an idea that I think might solve a problem that we have with the Skyward Sword 80% route, I'm going to try and test it to the best of my ability. And I might be able to figure out that the answer is yes, I can bypass this thing, or we can bypass this thing with all of this knowledge that we have together. So, it's a like, even though my story was kind of individual, it is like a group effort where we all want to see the progress of these games together. And that's essentially just what we push for. So, and that's what we're going to keep pushing for, as long as we still have the means to do this.
Yeah. I always say, like, speedrunning is also, like, a big community effort, like, the community trying to push the game to a better time. And I mean, you said you discovered, like, the first step towards that direction, but after you exposed the trick, as you mentioned it, like, everybody was helping, because, like, people speedrun the game for a reason, and they love it, so they also want to push it forward. And yeah, it's, like, really, really cool to hear that story, so really, really glad that I asked that question. And I believe that, like, wraps it up perfectly for today. So thank you for having you. Go check out his stream. Go check out his, like, you said you made some videos about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'll also link them on the YouTube video, and we'll mention them. Like, check out his videos if you don't understand what we just talked about. Like, I didn't understand all of it, but I understood some of it because I know how the Skyward Sword speedrun plays out. And if you don't understand, like, Ocarina of Time stuff we just mentioned, there's a ton of videos on YouTube already who try to explain the speedrun.
Yeah, there are some very long explanations of arbitrary.
Yeah, and if you find it interesting, listen to that things, because that's seriously what makes, like, speedrunning really, really interesting and really, really cool. Like, how all these things get discovered and how it all plays out. So yeah, thank you for having you. Is there anything else you just want to say, like, at the end, as a goodbye or whatever?
I don't think so. If you ever want help with, I'm just going to reiterate, if you ever want help with 3D Zelda speedrunning, be sure to, go to zeldaspeedruns.com/discord or /discords. I don't know if there's an S or not. And you can actually find a link to every single Zelda speedrunning Discord that is, like, in association with Zelda speedruns. So that would be the link you need to get started if you're interested in speedrunning 3D Zelda games.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, hope you liked that episode, everybody, and thank you, Jim, for being here and being awesome. See you all next time. Bye. Yo, thank you for listening to this episode all the way through. Really, really helps me and really supports me. So, you are awesome. Thank you. If you want to support me more, you can check out my stream or my YouTube. All the links are in the podcast description. And once again, thank you. I can't stress it out enough. Keep listening to this podcast if you like it, and share it with your friends. It really means a lot to me. See you next week with another episode where we talk about time management and mentality in speedrunning. See you soon.